Okay. So I believe we should be live.
Islay Academy, Islay. Welcome to the Islay Whisky Academy, live stream number 2. This is our broadcast to the world once a month, just to tell you a wee bit about the Islay Whisky Academy and to discuss things of interest to us and hopefully of interest to you. So I'm Rachel McNeil. I'm the founder of Islay Whisky Academy, and I'm broadcasting to you live from Islay. And we have Mr. Ian Murphy, our Islay Whisky Academy kinship host, and he's broadcasting to us live from Glasgowshire.
And very much, yeah. Great to be here. Can we do similar to what we did last time? If people are watching, can they just give us a wee thumbs up that you can hear us okay? Let us know that we're coming through loud and clear.
Hello from Mill Valley, Donna Andrew.
Donna.
Hamish. Aloha from Vancouver. Great to have you with us this evening.
Yeah.
So I don't know what it's like with all you, but in Islay, maybe it's to do with the global warming, which is pertinent to our talk tonight. It's blowing a hoolie out there. But Neil tells me that it's quite calm in Glasgow. I wish it was like that. Hello, Kairos. Hello from Cardiff. We're missing you being with us tonight. Hello, Sophia. Hello from the Netherlands. Oh, it's nice to have you on board. Rick as well. Oh, from San Francisco.
Yeah, we're covering all 4 corners here, I think. There we go. Frankfurt as well.
Hello from Frankfurt. Gosh, that's nice to have you all on board with us. Well, I'm going to tell you a wee bit about what our chat is tonight. So, as you all, I hope, know, in Glasgow in the last month, we had COP26, which was a conference of all nations around the world wanting to discuss how we deal with the issue that we're all facing just now of climate change, and what things that we can do as individual nations, as individual peoples, to try and combat our wasteful ways. So there's a variety of solutions, philosophies, ways of thinking about it, Neil, isn't there? There's
I mean, obviously the main gist of tonight, we'll be sort of more concentrating on how the climate is affecting the whisky industry and what the industry can and already is doing to try and combat that. But obviously we're aware that the whisky industry is sort of insignificant when compared to the wider damage that this stuff is doing. But obviously because we are all about whiskey, that's the route we'll be going down. But we're well aware that this is a much wider reaching issue, so it may be that the conversation veers slightly in other directions as well. Before we can,
though, Neil, is that the whisky industry seems to be pulling together as an industry. Whereas I'm not so aware of, for example, the car industry or, Falcha, John, or other industries that are pulling together collectively in the way that we are in Scotland. So I think that that's a very important thing. I like that we're doing that.
Yeah, very much. I think is it the SWA have set the target of being net zero by 2040 or something like that. Like that's across the industry, I believe. Obviously, some people are kind of pushing on to try and do things a bit quicker. We already have our first net zero distillery in Scotland up at Knocknean. So yeah, there are people that are doing things off their own back as well, and hopefully we'll kind of get on to that a bit later on as well. We do have a guest tonight, I should say, and we'll be introducing them a little later. Before we go on to that though, Rachel, for anybody who's not familiar with the Academy and what we do you maybe want to give a wee kind of introduction to what the Academy is all about?
Yes, certainly. I'd be delighted to do that. So Islay Whisky Academy is it's a school basically, but it's not just teaching people about whisky, it's introducing people to production, and it's also very rooted, Neil, as you know yourself, but it's very rooted in the culture of Scotland and the landscape of Scotland and our language, our heritage, the elements of the earth, which ties in very good with our topic tonight, the elements of the earth that are involved in whisky making, and how we need to use a phrase, drill down the production process into elements. So, for instance, barley and the focus on the earth, copper, the focus on how copper mining is not good for the planet. Also focus on things like barrels. I want people to think about trees, not just a barrel, like a thing in isolation. I want them to think about the trees, where the trees have grown, what trees do for the planet. Also think about time and the cycle of the agricultural year, because as we all know, whisky making began with whisky making that we know it in Islay, say, for example. It started with farms, and so obviously it worked through the production cycle of the year. The production cycle of whisky went through the agricultural year. So this is why we had shutdown in the summer, because sometimes there wasn't enough water even then. Hello, Chris Brown, lovely to see you. Sometimes there wasn't even enough water. So what they did was they stopped distilling then. The distilling was actually a thing that took place maybe in the winter time or coming up to the spring time, because obviously your barley was harvested in the autumn, left to rest, and then distilled. So it was part of a natural cycle. It's not a thing that's a thing like a satellite that's by itself. It's actually part of something a lot bigger. But the problem, I think, now in the industry is that we've become so big, we've become like monolithic, and we've kind of forgotten a wee bit about that. So the whole point of the Academy is to bring it back into that and make people think about our industry. It's completely rooted in the earth and all these kind of things. That's the kind of ethos. And a way back before it was fashionable, I mean, I know everybody's got it now, but my company always had a mission statement about what our values and ethics were. And in fact, an interesting thing, last Monday, I was invited by the kind of Nordic Council and an EU partnership to talk about my company, because it's an ethical company, and it was like not a workshop, a presentation, and I was representing Scotland. So there was companies from New Brunswick, there was companies from Finland. It's based in Lapland, the people that were running this. So they wanted to speak to somebody that ran a company that was dealing in ethical tourism. And the interesting thing is, Neil, I never actually thought of that word. Do you know what I mean? Like, this is what I've always done. I didn't know that it was viewed like that. So that was very nice for me and the business to be part of that, and to meet all these people who are thinking about life like that. Because sometimes I find it frustrating when businesses don't, and they maybe don't hear what you say because they think that you're kind of havering. But actually, we were thinking about this a way back in the past, and now it's something that's part of the zeitgeist, but people are respecting that this company was doing that. So that's very nice for us.
Yeah, that's excellent. Yeah. So basically, it's people can come to Islay and take part in the Academy, And not only do they get sort of, you know, life-changing, in many cases, experiences, both from making friends and, you know, visiting the distilleries and getting behind-the-scenes access and talks and lectures. Not only is there the sort of tangible experience like that, they're also hopefully taking away a whole new perspective on the whole process, the whole industry. As we use as one of our slogans, it's about looking at Scotch in context, and that's in you know, context with everything else that goes around it, you know, instead of just thinking of it as a drink, say, you know. But yeah,
absolutely, Neil. That's absolutely right. And another thing, I don't know where the sentence came into my head from, but now I've got it in all out Facebook banners, and it's sharing the spirit of Scotland, because it just came to me, and I thought that is what we do, you know, because you share the dram, well, we should actually share the spirit of the country. So that was the actual title of my presentation for the ethical tourism thing. So that was quite good. I quite like that.
Rick says, indeed, an amazing once-in-a-lifetime experience. Rick did the course just in October there. Which was a great week.
It was lovely to meet Rick, and Rick's wife also joined him. So that's another thing that we do. We're happy for students to bring their partners or, you know, their spouse or anyone with them. And even though like Rick's wife wasn't a complete whiskey geek and she didn't attend the kind of school part of it, she was welcome to come and join us in all the events at night. And in fact, when we went to Judah for the day, Catherine came with us for that, and I think she learned quite a bit and enjoyed herself. So that's another thing, because community is very important. Well, that's why it's called the kinship that you're the host, Neil. So
yeah, we don't want people just to do the academy and then that's it, and they go away and we never hear from them again. You know, Rachel's always been very keen that it remains with you, you know, and we stay in contact. And so anybody that does the academy, we have a Facebook group for afterwards that everybody remains connected. And like, we try and, obviously it's quite difficult because everybody's spread out all over the world, but we try and sort of bring each other back together, even just through wee conversations in the group. And occasionally we do maybe the odd Zoom meeting and things like that, just to keep the kinship together and reconnect with everyone once in a while, which I think is a lovely thing as well. You know, you don't just do the education part and then walk away. You do the education part, but you've met a new kind of family that stays with you, you know.
Yes, well, that's very important. And I feel that that's an ethical, and also I feel that's an environmental issue as well, because people nowadays, especially in the West, the biggest reason why people are not at their work is not from actual physical disease that you would think. It's actually from depression, because in the West, people are lacking a contact, a soulful connection. So it's vitally important to me that we maintain that in the academy. So that is a environmental thing as well that people sometimes forget about. Community, because we're part of it. We're connected to each other. We're connected to the land. We're connected to all other beings, and that's a vitally important thing, Neil.
Yeah, very much so. So obviously we've kind of mentioned already, you know, tonight's main topic is all about climate change, and in particular its sort of effects on the whisky industry, and what is the industry doing to combat it, to deal with it, or to fix the mess they've made in many cases. As we mentioned before, we've got a guest and we're going to bring him in shortly to join us. But just before we do that, if you give me a wee second, Rachel, I'm just going to talk quickly about, I actually heard this I'll give them a wee shout out, on the Whiskey Cast podcast with Mark Gillespie, and he had guests on and they were talking about, so it was like somebody from Ian MacLeod Distillers, and they had been working with students or with people based at University College in London, and basically Glengoyne had sponsored a sort of study into the long-term effects of the changing climate on the whisky industry. And it was really interesting to listen to, because I think sometimes maybe before you even talk about solutions, you need to make people understand what the risks are and what could potentially happen, you know. And it's not just about making sure distilleries are green. There is real tangible threats to distilleries and to whiskey brands if they don't act, you know. And so I think this particular study looked at the impact ranging over the next 50 to 100 years. The biggest sort of thing they were talking about was obviously rainfall, precipitation. Now, Scotland is obviously not famed as a dry country. We're well known for our rainfall, but any change in that, you know, if the climate keeps changing, if we lose that rainfall, that's a massive problem for the Scotch whisky industry. Even a small change could have drastic effects, you know.
You can see it this year, Neil.
Exactly, yeah. I think just to name two, I think Glenfarclas and Old Pulteney had to stop production for at least a month or so in the summer this year. Now, things like that have always happened to an extent, but they can expect that to start happening much more often. I mean, just as I think the report said that on average, it takes something like 47 litres of water to produce 1 litre of Scotch whisky. So that this is a massively sort of water-intensive process. So, you know, if there's any fall in precipitation levels, you know, over a number of years, that's going to be a massive problem, you know. You've then also, I mean, not just in terms of processed water, but what does the lack of rain do to the soil? What does it do to the barley we grow, to the quality and the consistency of the barley? You know, and there's more obvious things, more dramatic things like rising sea levels and what happens to those gorgeous coastal distilleries in Islay. What happens to Laphroaig with the sea?
We're not wanting Laphroaig to be underwater in 25 years.
You know, what happens to all these beautiful coastal distilleries if the sea rises 2 meters or something? And obviously, you can look at the maturation as well. You know, Scotch whisky is sort of styled around our maritime temperate climate.
Yeah.
You know, and that's how that partly shapes the character of the spirit. What changes? What changes to the flavour? What changes to the consistency? Will there be if our temperature goes up? Things will evaporate faster. We'll get a greater angel share, more cask impact. You know, you're talking quite radical changes to the style of the spirits, to some of the distilleries that can even operate. You know.
So they need to think of it. They really need to be thinking far ahead, Neil.
Well, yeah, very much so. And it's funny because I think we spoke about this before, sort of in another conversation, that Scotch whisky, by its definition, is a sort of long-term industry. You know, they have to think long-term. You know, when you lay down a cask of spirit, that's not necessarily for this generation. It's for future generations. You know, the people who work at distilleries are custodians of that business, and they need to hand it over to the next generation and to the next generation and to the next generation. So they all owe it to future generations to ensure that the business can carry on, that the whiskey can carry on.
This is a good thing, though, because sometimes people need a smaller context to be able to take care of or to have a conceptualize of guardianship. So maybe it's too big the problem to think about how are we going to take guardianship of the world. But if we can all break it down into like where we work, maybe people even like think about the brands that they like, the distillers that they like, and think about it more like that. And also what you said is very important, Neil. People need to start thinking about what the issues are before they start addressing them.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, and what I like about this as well, this study, was that it, you know, if you're looking at big corporations who think about their shareholders above all else, you know, this maybe shows them where this issue might hit them. You know, that if you don't invest now, you're going to have to invest in a much bigger way later on to save the business. You know, so it's maybe it's even the people.
I think as well, though, Neil. I think that the kind of corporate way that we live, or the economic way that we live in the world, needs to be drastically thought about, because I think that companies having the only person that they're answerable to is their shareholders. I think that needs to be really looked at. You know, I think that only caring about monetary, the narrow aspect of monetary gain is what's brought us to this crisis in the first place.
Yeah.
I'm conscious of time moving on. And
Yeah, I was just going to say. Yeah, we've got poor John waiting in the wings here. So
can we introduce? Can you bring in now?
I will bring him in.
I don't think he needs much introduction, but we'll introduce him anyway.
We've got as our guest tonight. He's an acclaimed writer on many topics, but notably whiskey. He's an educator. I myself did his course a few years ago. He's a passionate supporter of the Scotch whisky industry, but he's also the chairperson of Jubilee Scotland, which is kind of what we thought made him an appropriate guest for this evening. So welcome, please, to John Lamond.
Welcome, John. How are you this evening?
I'm well, thank you. And on the subject of water, a small subject, Balmainach, in its worm tubs, uses 80,000 litres a day. So wow. It's a relatively big distillery. Even Rosebank, which is will be a small distillery when it's up and running, will use between 35 and 40,000 litres a day in its worm tubs. So water is a big thing.
Very, very
obviously, energy is as well.
Yeah.
So, will we ask John to tell us a wee bit about the Jubilee Trust, in case people don't know, and what your role, because John's the chairman of the Jubilee Trust. So if you could tell us a wee bit about that, John, and a wee bit about your role as chairman, what that entails, please.
Okay. Jubilee Scotland was established in the mid-90s as Jubilee 2000 with the aim of cancelling all unpayable developing world debts by the year 2000. Obviously, that didn't happen. The one success, and there are Jubilee organisations all around the world. The one success was Norway, and Norway cancelled all its external debt somewhere about 2002, 2003. I got involved in Jubilee Scotland as a volunteer back in the late 90s, and through something else I was involved in, I became a director in 2012, I think it was, and took over as chair 2019. Basically, my role as chair is to ensure that the organisation is fulfilling its mission. It is it's following the aims that it was originally established to set down, and to provide strategic guidance to the executive of the company. Yes, I got involved with COP26. I was on the march on Saturday the 6th and got soaked 3 times. But it's something I feel strongly about. The fact that, for example, Zambia pays more in interest repayments than it does in health, education, and water supplies together is wrong. And the fact that countries like the United States have sold their debt to equity companies, and the equity companies are not short of moving into the courts to try and get some kind of settlement of the debt faster than they would normally have got it.
And there was
largest company to fall into regional.
Is John breaking up when you're speaking? When he's
there was a couple of wee bit of interference there. Yeah, it broke up a couple of times. It's been mostly okay though.
Okay. I was going to ask you, John. So, what did you took a petition, or you took something to COP26? What specifically was that?
We were part of an organisation that was tasked by the Scottish Government to organise a series of events called the Glasgow Climate Dialogues, and this was to establish the Scottish Government's strategy on climate change. We had meetings with people in Malawi, in Kenya, in Nicaragua, in the Marshall Islands, in Nepal, in putting all this guidance for the Scottish government together. And we had...
So it's a kind of ethical thing, really, in a way, you know, like a moral kind of...
oh, absolutely.
A moral kind of COP26 intervention, if you like, which is what we have to have. That's what we were talking about before you came on. We need to...
Yes, these are the countries that are affected by it now, seriously affected by it now. Bangladesh in the floods earlier this year, for example, 50% of it was underwater. 50% of the country was underwater.
They're suffering from out excess.
Yes, absolutely.
So essentially, you know, we as wealthy northern countries, we are the ones guzzling the gas and causing the problems. But it's the poor countries that are, you know, the poor southern countries that are footing the bill for it, both physically and financially, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. For example, Tuvalu in the Pacific, its highest point is 10 feet above sea level. Oof. So if we get 5 meters sea level rise that they've been talking about, you can kiss goodbye to every distillery on Islay bar 2. But if we get 5 meters of sea level rise, an entire nation disappears.
Yes.
So you know that's our. It's not our activities that have done that. It's our grandparents' activities that have done that.
It's everybody's problem. It's like years ago when I went to Australia and they had an earthquake and they did a rock concert, an open air rock concert to raise funds for it. And down the bottom of the stage it said it's everybody's fault. And I was quite young when I went there, and I was like, what does that mean? It's not my fault. It took me a long time. It took me all day before I figured that out. But I know what you mean. So it's a world problem. But what you're doing is highlighting it. But let's pull this tight into whiskey. So I want to raise a point that an Islay man, that he doesn't live in Islay, but his name's Alex Livingston, and he said, Rachel, what's going to happen? He's heard that that we're going to have to stop cutting peat for the whiskey. So I want to kind of talk about that a wee bit, because I think that's obviously the most important, not the most important, but the most people here are going to be interested in that. And you've got to find a way into the things through people's interest. Mm-hmm. So I want to talk about like the problems, because we don't yet know the solutions.
Yeah.
So I would say that the amount of peat that's extracted at the moment for whiskey making is nowhere near the amount of peat that's extracted for like horticultural things. For
gardening, yeah.
Yeah, so that's a different issue. So the figures that we are quoted in most texts that you find are not to do with peat and with whiskey making. So a big study needs to be done about that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now,
I think, sorry to interrupt, Rachel, but I read today, and I hope this information's up to date, but I read that the whiskey industry accounts for maybe 2% of the peat that's extracted in the UK, whereas horticulture, for example, accounts for 90%. You know, so in terms of the problems that face or the things that the whiskey industry need to address, peat's relatively maybe low down the priority list in terms with some of the fuel that they're using and stuff. But I do think it's one of the points that people keep coming back to. It's like the flagship point where whiskey's concerned that
it's very
people want to ask about, you know.
And the other thing that is very important that we need to differentiate between is demand and extraction, right? So the demand and the extraction is country specific. So they might be taking peat out of Scotland, but it's not our demand. Do you see what I mean? That needs to be thought about, because the extraction is far bigger in this country than the demand required in this country. So that's an issue that needs to be thought about. Also,
peat absorbs a great deal of carbon dioxide.
Yes, that's true. That's true. And the
Peat
way
bogs
that
absorb more than the, for example, the same area of the Amazon rainforest. Peat bogs absorb much more carbon.
Yes, that's right. That's right. And the thing is,
whiskey is not a problem.
But when you take peat, right? If you take it depends how you cut it, right? So if you cut peat without care for what you're doing, then you can actually extract peat and use it in whiskey making, right? Because if you cut peat by hand and replace what you've cut, like the top, you take the top bit off, and then you cut maybe 1 strip, 2 strips, use that and put the top layer of soil back on, then move on to another bit. I'm not saying it regenerates. It doesn't only regenerates 1 millimeter a year. But what happens is you are still maintaining that environment where it's like an ecosystem of its own right. But when you extract peat in a way that is only concerned about getting as much out as quickly as you can because you need it to put in a big maltsters, that's where the problem is. Because the distilleries have actually refined their peat, the process of how they actually smoke malt. They've done that very tight. I mean, they can push it further, of course they can. But the issue is not so much in the usage, but in the way that it's extracted. So if people paid attention to that and examined that and stopped extracting with mechanical means, and I said earlier, and I think that this is a valid thing, right? And you've got to be at the edges. You've got to be far out in front before people will. So it's a different way of thinking. There's peat cutting is an old traditional skill, and it's getting lost. I think that we should teach people how to cut peats and make it an apprenticeship. Why not? And cut all peats by hand that are needed for maltings. Why not do that? And because we can't just think about things in monetary terms. We've got to think about them in bigger terms. And then if you did that, you're doing it quietly and calmly, you're replacing it back, you can be extracting from different areas. And I mean, you have to transport it, yes, but there's ways that we can work with that. So it's looking at things deeply with a big picture and trying to be the most efficient, but not in monetary terms, in caring terms. So this is for Alex Johnston, this bit of chat. Alex Livingston, I beg your pardon. So I think that it's fine in Islay specifically, if we say, but there's the last person that's cutting peat in Islay is the guy that does our peat cutting workshops. Now he's retired. He does it as a hobby. His son's not really that interested in doing it. But once Kevin stops cutting peats, who's going to teach folk how to cut peats properly? It's part of our culture. And it's what makes our Scotch whisky. So why don't the distilleries make, so we've got cooper programmes. Why don't we have a peat cutting programme? I don't see how that's an issue. I think it should be something, I think the SWA should start thinking about that and say to all distilleries, because Scotch whisky is very known in the world for being peated. I know Islay and I know Speyside and all, but they're all getting their peated bits. So I think the whole industry should be looking at it and thinking about it.
Nice idea, but the cost will be fairly hefty.
But why would it be hefty? Why would it be more hefty than paying thousands of pounds for machinery and then having to do all these stupid, cure things? So they're curing peat bogs. They're doing things to cure the mess they've made. So why don't we stop making a mess?
Yeah, but I see the logic behind it. But as I said, the industry would have to bear the cost, and with machinery, you can put that over 4 years, whereas with an individual, you've got ongoing employment costs there, which are, I would imagine, much more hefty.
But I think we need to stop thinking about things in the narrow band of monetary terms. And I think that's the whole point of, I think that's, that we need to start looking at the world differently.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Run businesses differently. And if the Scotch whisky industry is absolutely serious what it does. Another thing is, you know, like for instance, using the new big boiler house in Bunnahabhain, right? Now, that's an amazing thing, okay? But I did work out of that today. So it's 6 megawatt. It needs 4,000 tons of wood a year, right? There's 2 forests in Islay that they're going to use. They run out in less than 2 years. Now, they're going to use their draft. Now, that's good to use the draft, right? But to burn something, to make fuel, is one of the lowest beneficial things to make fuel in monetary terms, right? Now, I mean, so they would actually be better using the draft for other things, but they're going to use it for that, right? So, but I think that the mindset of a lot of the green technology that we use now is the mindset that still comes from the oil engineering thinking. Yeah. So they're still on the same trajectory. Whereas, you know, what are they going to do in 2 years when we've cut all the wood in Islay? We're going to have to bring it in. You know, they could have had tidal.
Well,
do you know what I mean? And they don't. But
you
see, nobody wants it because they don't want renewable. Because renewable means that the middleman's not making any money, and this is what we're up against.
You might see more afforestation, and you know, things like larch and birch being planted as a cash crop. And when you look at what Scotland was 400 years ago, there were far, far, far more trees than there are now. Many of them were felled in the 18th century to provide ships for the English Navy.
That's right. So, that's right. Well, I mean, I'm quite in agreement with that.
So from that point,
I'm not in agreement with as deciduous monocropping, because monocropping kills everything. You know, so if we plant, plant broadleaf forests, oh yes, I'm happy about that, and we do that, yes. But see, if we're going to go back to this blinking deciduous monocropping that they did, that was 35 years ago that these forests were planted in Islay. Well, that's 35 years. How long does it take for them to grow again? Do you know what I mean? Even if they plant them straight away and they cut down stumps. I just feel that it's like they're taking a sledgehammer to crack a nut. Or they're not thinking about it in big enough pictures.
Like, if you've got things like larch or beech, you're only talking 20 years. But it still is a long-term crop.
Mm-hmm.
But do you know what I mean? So
oak, you're talking hundreds.
It's not Distill, it's Distol Islay, it's called. But they're going to run out of our forest in 2 years to feed that megalith. And then we're going to have to bring in wood, you know, because they haven't got enough draft. Well, some geek that's watching tell us from 3 million litres, how much draft, I was going to work it out, but I never had time. How much draft will there be out of 3 million litres of alcohol? Because you can work it out by the mash tun, and how much litres of liquid go through. You can work it out because they'll have draft. I mean, I'm not picking on them, but it's just because it's an Islay, I kind of know about it, and it's a mindset that I want people to think about. I don't know what you guys think. But.
Well, what about, I was even going to say, I mean, talking about boilers, John, did you see the thing coming from Bruichladdich today that they've been granted, is it 265 million from the government
Yeah,
to
the UK
invest in a
government
new
has given
hydrogen boiler.
the UK government has given the industry 11.3 million, which is peanuts when you think of the size of the industry. Four companies, I think it's four companies, one of whom supplies Bruichladdich and probably several other distilleries, and this is to look at hydrogen cells. Now, hydrogen, the storage of hydrogen is a problem because it's highly volatile, seriously dangerous stuff, but it comes out water. You remove the oxygen for it, you've got the hydrogen. And effectively, that's what Aberdeen's buses are running on at the moment. Glasgow are apparently looking at renationalising the bus service in Glasgow and going over to cell fueled buses. So is I think Edinburgh's got some, but nothing like all of the fleet there. So it's something that people have been looking at for some time, and they're suggesting for cars it's much more effective fuel than electricity, because with electricity you need these huge batteries which weigh a great deal, and the problem is recycling them once the car's finished with, or once the batteries are done, because the batteries don't last as long as the car. So from that point of view,
another point I want to make is that we need to think about a conversion of energy, because I'm not aware of the conversion power for hydrogen compared to what you have to put in to get out. Do you see what I mean? I don't mean direct correlation. I mean in the whole thing, because this is another thing that people don't think about.
Yeah.
You know, and it's the same as how people say that nuclear is clean. Nuclear is not clean, because do you know that the cost of that, they only take it down to the 7th generation of pollution, and after that they don't take it. That's their line of where they cut it off. But they know that it goes further than that, actually, in bodies and in everything like that. But they choose to take it at that line. So these things, if we've got more specific distillery things, Neil, that you've looked at.
I mean, the Bruichladdich one was the big one today. Obviously, they were talking about. I've taken a note of this because there was no way I was going to remember it. But they were talking about. So obviously, this is a new boiler that's going to be getting fitted. It will be a zero emission hydrogen boiler, and it will be used to heat the steam for their stills. Basically, it's going to be the first of its kind in the UK. I think, again, just to put things in context, they were talking about the amount of power that they use. And I think it said Bruichladdach's annual energy requirements equates to roughly 800 homes. So that's one distillery, 800 homes in a year, That's a lot of fuel to be going through to power your boiler. So it's understandable and it's admirable the way they're looking at this, I suppose. But I think, as John said, it's a kind of a drop in the ocean. This is only looking at powering the stills. Yeah. Then you've got your tankers and all that. I suppose that kind of compares to Glenfiddich, isn't it? Had a big sort of showpiece headline about using their spirit or leftover stuff to power their fleet of trucks. But again, all of these things are sort of showy. But
the draft's going through an anaerobic composter, and it's being turned into a form of low carbon fuel, which with the potail is powering, don't quote me, 10 of their trucks at the moment, and they've got a fleet of 50. Karen Betts said today that with this 11.3 million coming from the government, 40% of the industry's power requirements are now from renewables. So if the industry has got to 40% now, then the aim of being 100% carbon neutral by 2040 it's achievable, and it
Yeah,
might
but
even be achievable.
what does it mean by renewables?
by-
Renewable is only wind and solar, and these things. It's another name if they're from like the carbon capture and all the rest of it. It's a different
No,
style
it's
of
renewables includes
Right.
tidal,
All right,
wind,
okay.
solar, and also the fact that they are, for example, 12, 15 years ago, Cameron Bridge was having a biomass plant put into to use their waste material as a source of power. And my next door neighbour was pulled in because apparently the team who were putting the thing together didn't know what they were doing. And Frank went in and he sorted it out. And effectively, it's the equivalent of taking 24,000 cars off the road. So it's a phenomenal amount of
I find that very interesting because years ago I did renewable architecture at the CAT Centre in Wales, Centre of Alternative Technology. And the problem that we found, I mean, this is like a long time ago, the problem that we found then was you had this technology and that technology and that technology. Yes, Sophie, you're right. Exactly. That people didn't know how to join them together. So, and it's like a lot of this is an engineering problems. It's the same as when you get like the ferry built and it doesn't fit the pier, or the dam built and the level of the dam is lower than the extraction, because there's departments and there's no overview. And this is what needs to be looked at a lot in energy, because they go, oh, this is brilliant, this will save us this, or this will do this. But actually, in the bigger scheme of things, it's actually not beneficial at all. So I think that they need to, it's like spending a lot of time on a business plan before barging in.
There's a comment here from John Brady. He says, I was up at Glenmurray a few weeks ago and saw how they had fitted heat exchangers to their stills to reduce energy usage and costs elsewhere in the process. I mean, that's becoming fairly common now, isn't it? The heat exchanger thing.
And Bowmore Distillery, we must tell about them because they're amazing. Yep. Long time ago, they heat the swimming pool with their waste heat. So, you know, they've got huge heat exchangers in the distillery down underneath. And that's a brilliant thing. They did that a long time ago. You know, amazing how to do.
And even also, before that, Glengarry had the hot houses which were heated by the heat from the distillery to produce tomatoes.
That's right. Yes, exactly. So it's like self-sustaining. Yes. But do you know, I think I noticed tonight, just before this show, guys, I went down to the shop, right? And here's a yeast tank coming up from France. I was thinking of Jean from our lecture, if it was Lamond, right? And I was thinking, my God, we're bringing in yeast, bringing in everything, Tyler. You know, it's quite.
No, you're going to build your own yeast plant on Islay.
Well, I think they'll need to start getting natural yeast. Like these guys, there's guys that they want to come in my course. They're called the eccentric, and they get yeasts. It's like Alan Bishop in America. He got old yeasts that his grandmother had from some old barn. But these guys are working, what are they called? Nordic spirits or spheric spirit? I can't remember their name, but they're work. I think Nick's working with them to use natural yeasts. I think that everything should be looked at. Everything.
The wine industry has long gone down we get back to Mark Rainey's terroir, if you forgive me. The wine industry has long done this, where they literally scrape the yeast cells off the wall in the winery and use these. But with things like the yeast you're seeing coming in on the trucks, or the yeast that's produced at the yeast factory 2 miles away from me, you're getting a yeast which is going to give you results which are always going to be similar. You're going to get a great consistency. Whereas if you peel them off the walls, you don't know what you're getting. So it could take twice as long, and your yield could drop through the floor.
So it's a case of it's to do with your business model, because it's the same. You know, people argue about is it the cask that gives it the flavour, or is it the spirit that gives it the flavour? But it's your business model, how that works. You make that decision before you start how that works. So why do people argue about it? So I'm aware time's running on.
Look at Kilhoman.
Yes.
Look at Kilhoman. They are fermenting and distilling fields separately. They're doing a bottling of each field. So therefore, terroir.
Well, yes. I don't know if Anthony's doing that so much. Waterford certainly is. Anthony's doing different grains. He's doing different grains. Yes, that's true. That's true.
And he's doing different fields.
Waterford's doing different. Yeah, as well. That's right. Yeah, they're doing biodynamic. I love that. That's excellent.
Because Anthony has a background in wine.
Yes. And Anthony's not interested in being a huge production. He wants to make quality. It's very, very interesting. Yes, I like what they're doing.
I think that something that's come out, I mean, there's been a few, not just us, there's been a few streams and conversations, obviously, around this topic. And one of the things that I keep sort of hearing people talk about, it's as you said earlier, Rachel, it's very much about the way you do things. It's not necessarily what you're doing, it's the way you're doing them. And it's being responsible, whether that be in extracting peat, whether that be in farming. Bruichladdich did a really good stream a couple of weeks ago, which is still on their Facebook page, by the way. People should go and watch it if they haven't already. But they had farmers and distillers and people from bread labs and all sorts in to discuss the topic. And it was all coming back to the health of the soil. And, you know, there was a lot of talk about, you know, even with organic barley, a lot of people said, no, it'll be really unstable, it'll be really low yielding, and actually they're finding that that's not really the case. So, you know, there's a lot of sort of naysaying, and that's never going to work, and you can't do it. But people don't know because they've not tried, you know. And it's about, as I said, to bring that back, it's about being responsible in the way you do things, about responsible farming, responsible, you know, peat cutting, responsible distilling, responsible shopping on our part. You know, it's about doing things the responsible way and not just blundering in. If I can just as well, there was something I really liked on Bruichladdach's website. And by the way, the drama I have been sipping on tonight is their organic.
I love it.
Which I thought made sense for the evening, you know. But there was a wee blurb they had on about, now they were talking more about flavour, but I thought it still applied. And it said the relationship between distiller, farmer and soil was intimate and enduring. These ties were lost as industrialised farming cut through ancient synergies and an age of super efficient blandness was born. You know, and I think that goes back to what we were saying about yeast there as well. You know, we've pursued yield and consistency, maybe even lost a bit of flavour along the way, but we've also done a huge amount of damage to the landscape, to the atmosphere. And, you know, that's what I think has to be righted. I'm conscious of time, obviously, but I'd like, if possible, I mean, John, can you sign us off from this conversation with a bit of hope? You know,
can I ask John something before we get the hope?
Yes.
Go on.
John, see a thing that I'm concerned about, because I love copper. Love it, right? So, because copper is so badly extracted, you know, that it makes hell for where the people live. It's hell. These copper mines are just like hell. Yep. See the Jubilee Trust thing. Have they thought about that in any way, you know, for compensating the people? Because it's like mining of diamonds and things like that. Copper is evil. Not copper. Copper extraction is evil. As the Jubilee Trust
we haven't done. Our focus has been on debt and really the Fair Trade Foundation looks at things like that. For example, there are Fair Trade diamonds out there just now, and there's Fair Trade gold out there as well.
Yes.
But effectively, during the Glasgow Climate Dialogues, there was a woman over from Malawi. She was a farmer, and the seeds they had to buy, they're not allowed to collect seed from, because the seed is owned by one of the international seed companies. So effectively, they have looked at historical plants. They've gathered seeds from the historical plants. They're growing these. They're now growing them organically. They're not using artificial fertilizer and pesticides, and getting much better results than they were getting previously.
Great.
So the way forward is either biodynamically or organically. But
yes,
we as a global north, the wealthy global north, have a responsibility to the global south to cut their debt, to enable them to make the changes they have to take on board to make themselves climate resistant. And
yes.
at the moment, we're looking at loss and damage. Nicola Sturgeon announced doubling of the £25 million which Scotland set aside for this to £50 million. It takes us, because we're a tiny little country, and it takes us to somewhere like 2-3% above where we should be in this £100 billion that's the nations are supposed to be giving to the developing world. I have to say, some nations in the global north are doing it as loans instead of grants, which I find is a terrible way to look at it, because that money was intended as a give. You don't pay it back.
No.
But
I think it's like they're due that money from us, really.
Yeah, it's actually we already owe them. It's not the other way round. It's not. This is us repaying our debt.
Absolutely.
Exactly. But I'm pleased that I'm pleased that John, that you've come on the talk with us and raised awareness of this, because people don't always think about that. So I think that I'm very pleased that you came on and talked. I know that wasn't maybe specifically of whiskey, but it's part of the whole thing that we're trying to care about, and whiskey is trying to be part of that, I believe.
Thank you for having me and allowing me to speak.
No problem, John. What we'll do is we'll say goodbye to John then. Thanks again for joining us, and no doubt we'll invite you back on another time. Cheers, John. Okay. Well, I hope people have enjoyed that. I think John was a good choice to get on. He's quite well informed, and he's sort of been at the coalface, so to speak, with this stuff. That's probably a terrible term when you're talking about climate. But he's been on the front lines, is better way of putting it, probably. Of this stuff. So, and with his background in whiskey, it was a logical choice. There's one other question, I think, Rachel, maybe if you want to have a go at answering. John Brady has asked, is there anything we as consumers can do
in the whiskey world?
I would say, let's bring it back to whiskey.
Yes. Well, I would say, John, so Twitter is a great platform. Twitter is a great platform to get the ear of companies. So if you want to speak to a company about something, you can write it on Twitter, because all their followers see it, thousands of followers see it, and they feel obliged to respond. And if they don't respond, then you can speak again. Twitter is a very good platform. If we can't march in the streets, we can use Twitter. So if you want to deal with a company, because I think I'm just thinking about it tonight. I'm going to say to the SWA that they should be looking at copper and places like all the copper you know, where the stills come from, where do they get the copper from? Because you can buy ethical diamonds, you can buy ethical gold. I think maybe we should start thinking, let's get ethical copper.
Yeah.
Because it's so intrinsic to the whiskey industry. Wouldn't it be good to focus on that? Do you know what I mean? To raise awareness of it and to start thinking about it anyway as a start.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yep. Okay. Well, Chris says that's been a great conversation. It really gets us thinking about important subjects that aren't talked about much. I mean, that's kind of the point of this, isn't it? You know, we can use whiskey, and this goes back to the Academy in general. You can use whiskey as a jumping off platform to learn about much wider issues, you know. It doesn't all need to just be about the whiskey itself. We can use that as a lens to sort of focus in on other things, you know.
That's true. Scotch in context. So I'm just going to have a wee context. Listen to this noise. Listen to this noise. Oh, nice noise. Slàinte everybody, and Aikava, and have a very good night, and thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you again in a month. But I'm thinking, is this November? A month is between Christmas and New Year. We'll discuss whether we can have one, but it might be quite nice to have a show. We'll see.
It might be fun. Yeah, it might be fun.
Goodness knows the nick of us, but
all right. Cheers, all. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you again.